Hi guys, I'm really sorry I couldn't be there today. The thorn is flaring up in my side. No, he's very sick actually, and it hurts me to see him so sick. I dragged him to work with me yesterday and he slept on the floor in my office, so I'm taking him to the hospital today and get him some medicine or something, some kind of help because he's really hurting. So I can't be there today, but I didn't want to let you guys down as well. It's too close to the end of the semester, and I don't want to tell you just to go over chapter 13 by yourself. So I'm going to continue, and let's see, here we are. Let's go ahead and make this big. And we're just going to pick up, and I'm going to go through the rest of 13 with you so that you don't get behind. And then also to help things out a little bit, I am going to dump chapter 16, which is my gift to you. Will not be on your final exam. And as we talked about the next couple classes, I'm going to go over specifically what's going to be on the final and review with you so that it's not so overwhelming. Okay, so let's look at social influence here. And this is where we left off at the other class. So I just want to go through each of these. I will probably pick 2 to 3 of these to be on the final exam. Reciprocity is when we reciprocate. Okay, so reciprocating means if I do something for you, you do something for me. It's kind of like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So that kind of principle is very powerful. This works anywhere you go. And the principle was illustrated in one research project where they had waiters who made people feel like they needed to do something back because they'd done something good for them. So besides being a friendly waiter and a nice waiter, what they did was they wanted to see if they left something as small as a mint, would the people feel like they needed to do something nice back? So they did a test where waiters just gave people the bill. Then they did the experiment where they gave 1 mint with the bill, and as you can see the percentages there, tips increased by 3% when they started giving a mint with the bill. So then they tried giving 2 mints with the bill instead of 1, and it increased to 14%. So they thought, okay, what if you make it even more of a big deal, like highlight that I'm giving you a gift? So what they did was they had the waiter come, give him the bill, give the mint, and then he would walk away. And then about halfway, as he's walking away from the table, he would turn around and he'd say, you know what? For you nice people, I'm going to give you 2 mints. Tipping increased 23% just from that little gesture. So we see that reciprocity, the rule of reciprocity is that when someone does something for us or provides a service for us or is kind to us or gives something, we feel like we have to give something back. It's just like when you get an invitation to somebody's birthday party. Even if you didn't want to go to their party, you feel obligated to invite them to yours because you were invited to theirs. Kind of like when you have kids. You'll find this out when you have kids. When you get invited to other kids' birthday parties, you inevitably have to invite their kids to your kid's birthday party. It's that principle of reciprocity. Okay, there's the principle of consistency. This is the foot in the door phenomenon. It's the same thing. So on your test, I am not going to call it the principle of consistency. I'm going to call it the foot in the door phenomenon to go with the name. And both names are accurate, but I'm going to go with foot in the door because that's what's in your textbook. So this is what this is. You get a smaller commitment first, and then you're able to get a larger one later because they want to be seen as consistent. I've already supported your organization by allowing the little sticker in my window. So now that you're asking me to put a bigger sign in my window, I have to continue to support the organization. I don't want to suddenly have to explain why I no longer want to support it. It's consistency of behavior. Okay, the next one, ingratiation, is very similar to reciprocity. It's that we want to give to somebody that we like, and so we will, let me think of the example for this one. Okay, we feel like we owe somebody because they have something in common with us. Let's put it this way. My best example is if I find out someone's a Dallas Cowboy fan, right? I feel ingratiated to them already because I started liking them because they have something in common with me. And now when I meet them later and they need my vote or they need my support, or they're kind of a jerk to me, I give them a little more grace. I give them a second chance because they're a Dallas fan. I'm not saying that I do that, but sometimes you get that little feeling like, gosh, I really don't like them, but they are Dallas fans. So ingratiation is similar to that in that, let me give you a real world example. So let's say you are about to negotiate some, and negotiation is the example given here. When research was done and they had groups that had to negotiate a deal later on, they had like a little party beforehand or little hors d'oeuvres and a time to just talk and network. And so when people were talking, if they found something in common before they went in to negotiate, they were more likely to negotiate later. So for example, people would be standing around eating some of the hors d'oeuvres or whatever snacks were there, and they're like, "Oh, I see you're eating Ruffles potato chips. I love Ruffles. I like them so much better than the plain." Then the other guy would be like, "Yeah, I like the Ruffles better than the plain too." And then you start a conversation and you try and find as much similar between you as you can. Then later on, when you're sitting down in the negotiation table, people are more likely to negotiate with you because they already have some kind of connection with you. You both like the same thing. They already like you. So they're more likely to want to cooperate with you. And that's that process of ingratiation where I've already made a connection with you. You kind of, need to stick with me. We're together. We're buds. We're together on this. So if you ever need to get somebody on your side for a vote or something, good thing to do is to find common ground between you and establish that first, and then later meet with the negotiations. You don't have to let them know that's what you're doing, though, because then it might not work. You just have to be like, oh, yeah, and you should be genuine. You shouldn't make up that you like something just because they do. Okay, scarcity. So the principle of scarcity is if I can make you feel like something is scarce or about to go out of business or about to be taken off the menu, you're more likely to rush in and try and buy it. So if I want to increase sales, I tell you that the Shamrock Shake is only here for a month. It's scarcity, and it causes people to buy more and spend more and want it. It makes you want it more. The Concorde is an example. The Concorde is a flight that flies direct from New York to London and London to New York. So for people who are flying overseas, it's really a pain to connect. You could end up flying for, traveling for 24 hours on something that's only a 10-hour flight or an 8-hour flight, or I don't know how long it is to London. I know when I go to the Middle East, it is 15 hours. And if I have to connect, it's 24 hours. So it'd be like a whole day, 24-hour period before I get to my destination. So you want to be as direct as possible. So the Concorde's a popular flight. However, they weren't filling the planes. So what they announced was, because they wanted the planes to, we wanted people to take them more often and not take the cheaper flights that connect you. So they canceled one of the daily flights. They said, we're no longer going to have two flights. Two Concorde flights. So once that happened, people, I guess, started to panic, feeling like it was going to go away and they weren't going to have that option anymore. And the plane fare reservations doubled for the Concorde. So they were filling every flight and more. So that was interesting. So that's scarcity. When you feel like something is not that much left, it's kind of like when you go and you see a whole bunch of red shirts and there's only a couple blue. Somehow you're more attracted to the ones with the fewer color than the ones there's an abundance of. Not always, but sometimes that happens. Okay, novelty, the principle of novelty. So we are attracted to things that seem like they're new and improved. So it's funny how every time you pick up a bathroom cleaner or a toothpaste, they all say new and improved. And how many times can you new and improve this thing? And was it garbage before? Was it crap? I don't know. So, but that makes us, you see that yellow sticker on the side that says new, and it's supposed to attract us, and it does. Guess what? When a manufacturer comes out and changes, I don't know, the percent from 2 to 3, they can claim it's new. Is being sure of what. So, if something is marked new, it tends to cause us to be more attracted to it and want to buy it. It's like there's something special about it because it's novel. Okay, and principle of authority. It's the same thing as obedience, and we're going to talk more in detail about obedience and that social influence of obedience. But when a small piece of that obedience is an authority figure, and when we view somebody as a credible authority, it's really hard for us to go against it. And I think the best example I can give you is parents. So my parents, even though I don't agree with everything that they say or believe, and I have butted heads with them several times, but one of the reasons I butt heads with them is because if I'm going to do something or I want to do something and my parents don't approve, or they say they don't believe in it, or they don't think it can work and they don't want me to do it, it's really uncomfortable for me to go ahead and do it. I may go ahead and do it, but I would feel so much better if I could just persuade them to say, yeah, go ahead, try it. Yeah, that might work. And when they refuse to, when they withhold that from me, it makes me really hesitate and sometimes give up on an idea. So that principle of authority is very powerful in our decisions because we see authority as something we trust. That's why, and we talked about this in commercials, that's why they show doctors in commercials. And at the bottom, they let you know it's not really a doctor, but just the appearance of a doctor saying, this is the better toothpaste, or this is a safer car, makes us want to go along with it. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so which brings us to conformity and obedience. We conform, we talked about conformity before a little bit, and we obey. So Solomon and Ash did this experiment, and in this experiment, they had confederates. So remember, when you're doing an experiment, you could set up people that are working with you on it. So they're part of the research team. And then you bring in the one subject, and he's surrounded by people that are on the team. And I think I have a picture. There we go. So there's the actual experiment right there. And you see the guy in the middle, and you see the look on his face. He is really experiencing almost stress, because if you look to the left of the picture, you see those lines. The one that's on the farthest line to the left, they're saying, which line is closest to this line? Well, obviously, when you look at this, out of choices 1, 2, and 3, choice 2 looks almost, to me, exactly the same as the standard line that's on the left. So what they do is they go through 7 people. 6 of them are Confederates. 1 of them is your test subject. And what they wanted to see is, will people conform even when it's obvious, so obvious that their answers are wrong, that they are wrong? Will people still go along with it? And overwhelmingly, that's what he found. Now, it did not change the person's belief. So the guy in the middle clearly thinks 2 is the choice. But see the demeanor of the men around him. The other men were making the choices of 3 or 1. And they said it real calmly, just like, yep, it's 3. It's the closest. And so then they get to this poor guy, and he's like, so for the first couple answers, he's saying 2. He's like, I think it's 2. I think it's 2. You know, he's feeling uncomfortable saying it. Then after a couple times around, he starts to answer 3. 3? 3. So he's given the answer that 3 is the closest when he knows it's 2. When it's clearly, obviously, it's not ambiguous, it's clearly the wrong answer. 70-some% of the time, you can check me in your book, it was high. A high percentage of people just went along with whatever the wrong answer was just because everyone else was saying that, and they thought there must be something wrong. This is my little lesson on nonconformity. This is my thorn when he was little. And we were going to Disney World that day, and we were standing outside of my laboratory at Florida, Atlantic University. We were leaving from there from Florida, and you see those red straps on his shoulders. That is his Winnie the Pooh backpack, and we took it every time we went to Disney, and he carried it to school in his younger years, and that's one of his school shorts, I think. So I was probably pulling him out of school to go to Disney during the week because there's smaller lines during the week. And that backpack he used to carry to school. Well, it came to, and I can't remember if it was 2nd grade or 3rd grade, but the kids started making fun of him for having a Pooh Bear backpack. And he came home to me and he said, Mom, everyone's making fun of me for having the Pooh Bear backpack. And they started laughing and saying that they don't watch Pooh anymore. He said, I want a new backpack. Well, this broke my heart because 1, it shows me he's growing up. And 2, it it broke my heart that he was being intimidated. It was something that he liked, and he knew Pooh Bear wasn't real, but he still liked him, and he was allowing that group mentality and that social influence to dictate to him his behavior. I bought him a new backpack. I had no problem with that. But I told him this. I said, next time someone in your class tries to say they're not watching Pooh, because I know they still are, all your friends your age are still watching cartoons. I said, you stand up and say, and I promise you, baby, stand up and say, I like Pooh. I still watch it. And just sit back and don't act intimidated. And I said, I guarantee you somebody else will have the guts to say, I do too. But because nobody said anything, everyone's intimidated by the group and they're afraid to speak up. So he went back to school, and the first opportunity he got, he did it. He came home so excited one day. He's like, Mom, guess what happened? Guess what happened? I'm like, what? And I'm so glad it worked. I was like, because you never know if your advice is always going to work. He stood up and he said, he told me that he stood up in class and said, I still like Pooh, and I still watch Pooh cartoons. And he said, and slowly, another person stood up and said, so do I. Another one stood up and said, I still like Pooh too. He said a whole bunch of kids started standing up and saying that they like Pooh. And then he realized that the ones that were making fun of him were only 3. The whole rest of the class still watched Pooh. And so he learned a lesson that day, and I was so glad he learned it, that it just takes one person to stand up against the crowd. And there's probably other people that feel the same way, but they're afraid to voice it because this wave in the group is pushing you to conform to the group that started first, or vocalize their beliefs first. Okay, so that brings us to Stanley Milgram's experiments. This is in your book. You can read about it, but I'm just going to quickly tell you it's a shock experiment. It was an awesome experiment that they did at Yale. And what they did is they brought people in. They told them that it was a learning experiment. So they wanted to see what people would do as the learner and what people would do as a teacher. And it was just to see what reinforcement and punishment was the experiment, to see what punishment would do to learning. Would it accelerate learning? Would it help learning? And so they would let them draw out of a hat, and both pieces of paper said teacher, so that no matter what, their subject got teacher. The other guy was, again, a Confederate, part of the research team. So he came in, and he picks teacher. They take him on one side of the machine in a different room, and they set the guy down who's a Confederate, part of the research team, and he's pretending to be the learner. They strap him in, they take the teacher's hand, they put it where his hand is, and they shock him, a mild shock, so he can feel, yes, it's working, it's really shock. And so they strap this guy in, they strap him down, so you can see that he cannot pull his hand off the shock pad. And he's voluntary, though, and he says, well, I have a mild heart condition, is that going to be a problem? This is the learner saying that, the Confederate. And the teacher's watching all this, and the researcher says, yes, it's fine, everything is safe, don't worry, you will just be shocked, but it will be okay. So they shut the door, they bring the learner, the real subject, around to the other side, and they show him a machine, okay? Starts with 15-volt shock, goes all the way up to 450 volts of electricity, and says danger, XXX. So they tell him every time your learner gets an answer wrong, you have to apply a shock. And each time you apply a shock, you have to go up one higher, one higher, one higher. So that's what they do. And overwhelmingly, now what Milgram was trying, let me give you a backstory that's not in your book. Milgram was trying to prove that the German people were innately wired to be mean and cruel, and that they had less of a sense of remorse or empathy or sympathy for others, right? Because he thought he was going to prove that Americans would never willingly harm somebody and know that you might be killing them. Well, to his surprise, they did. I thought I had a picture of it here. What I have is a video, which I'm going to let you guys go watch on your own. It's the Milgram experiment. You can watch the stress that these people are going through, because as they're doing the shocks, they stop and they're like, this is 150 volts, and the guy's over on the other side, and they can hear him yelling. He's like, stop, stop, I want out of the experiment. And he's pleading and begging them to let him out of the experiment. My heart, my heart. And so the guys that are administering the shocks are like, they're turning to the researcher and saying, I can't do this. I have to stop doing this. And we got to let him go. He doesn't want to continue. And the researcher just sits there with no emotion and says, the experiment requires that you go on. Please, go on. Give him the next one. You must apply the shock. You must apply the shock. The experiment requires that you continue. People continued after that because an authority figure told them to. So they kept going, kept going. It was over half of them went all the way to 450. They couldn't even hear the guy anymore. He stopped yelling. So at like 200 volts, he stopped yelling. Silence. He stopped answering the questions. And so he's turned to him. He's like, he could be dead in there. They're thinking they killed him. Or at least at most made him pass out. Like, he's not even answering the questions anymore. And the experimenter goes, it requires that you go ahead. No answer is considered a wrong answer. Apply the shock. Apply the shock. So these men, even though they were completely stressed out and they didn't want to do it and they thought they had murdered someone, they went all the way to 450 volts. Okay, so comparing that to the Nazis, which was a huge surprise to Milgram, because he expected Americans to refuse to participate, to get up and walk out, and none of them did. None of them walked out. Okay, so when the Nazi soldiers were captured and they were asked, why did you murder all these innocent men and women and children? And their answer wasn't, oh, because I hate homosexuals, because I hate Nazis, because I hate Jews. They didn't have that kind of answer. They said, because I was told to, because I was following orders. I was just following orders. And as long as the teacher in this experiment was not responsible and was obedient to somebody else, they felt they had to be. This authority figure from Yale is telling me I have to apply the shock. It never dawned on any of them to just get up and refuse, walk out, go to jail, whatever. I'm not going to kill somebody. No, they went all the way. So we see how strong obedience is. And if you want to see it with your own eyes, you can see that the people they didn't figure out it was an experiment. They had no idea. They were visibly stressed. And when they were asked afterwards, if you were so upset, if you really felt this bad, why did you do it? And they said, because you told me to, because I had to, because that was the rules. So obedience is very powerful. Okay, so here's some factors that I do want you to understand, and this is common sense. So when was obedience the highest? Okay, if you watch the video, you'll see that the experimenter, the researcher that's recording everything, is sitting right there next to the teacher that's applying the shocks. Okay, the learner, the one that he's supposedly administering the shocks to and hurting, is on the other side of the wall, out of sight. He can't see him. He can hear him, but he can't see him. So he's not face to face with the person he's shocking, okay? So obedience is highest when the person giving the orders is close by. The obedience is highest. And here's an interesting fact to illustrate that. When he's right there, when you know they can see you or will come up soon, you're more likely to obey. In some of the concentration camps, when they lined up the women and children face down on the ground and shot them in the back of the heads. And these soldiers went down doing this, and they expressed that they did not feel comfortable doing it, and the authority figure said, no, you must do it, do it. They're hearing the victim. They're not facing them face to face. They're hearing the victims pleading, crying, please don't kill my daughter, please don't kill my baby. Go down, they shot him. Towards the end of the line, way away from the bosses that were telling him to do it and away from the comrades seeing them, a lot of those officers reportedly told them to run, go hide in the woods, go hide anywhere, go. And they let a lot of them go because they were further away from the authority figure, further from sight, and their conscience got to them finally. All right. The other thing was that there was an authority figure here of Yale. Yale is one of our Ivy League colleges, one of the founding colleges in the United States. it's a huge authority figure. Who would question if they're conducting this experiment if it's not okay to do what they're asking you to do? Also, the victim was depersonalized in the way that he was on the other side. You didn't have to face him, you didn't have to look him in the face, you did have to hear him. And to me, that would have been enough, but we don't know till we're in somebody's shoes. And these were not stupid, ignorant people, they were white collar businessmen, most of them. Um, and there was nobody as a defiant role model. So, like when I told Chris to stand up and say, I don't care, I still watch poo. Same thing here. If this experiment was redone, and it was done again, when it was done again and somebody else was in the room and said, I'm not doing this, the other person was 10 times more likely to say, I'm not doing it either. But when there was nobody there defying the authority and saying, I'm not doing this, they continued. They continued. But the presence of just one person saying, I'm not going to participate in this, opened the door for a lot more people to say, neither am I. But it takes that one person to first have the guts to stand up. Keep that in mind as you go through life. Okay, here's the graph. There's one of the pictures. You can see the shock machine and how it goes from left to right, higher shock each time. You can see where they're strapping in the Confederate, which was the learner, pretending to be the learner. I really recommend that you watch the short video. It just shows you pieces of it, and it's very interesting. Okay, so social facilitation is where the presence of others will either encourage us to do stuff or will cause social loafing. We'll get to social loafing in a minute. So the presence of other people around can actually facilitate our behavior or arouse us to do things we might not have done if we were in a smaller crowd or by ourselves. And so and I think there's a picture in your book of the hometown advantage or the crowding effect, but sports. Okay, so that's a great illustration. And a lot of times there's a lot of crime or fighting, especially at soccer games. I don't know if you guys watch soccer, but the fans get just as rowdy. Like there's a lot of fights on the field, and there's a lot of fights in the stand. And so the crowding effect actually causes us to be a little more hostile, to join in and do these things in the crowd. The hometown advantage is exactly that. For whatever reason, if you look at statistics, teams play better when they're at home. They have the hometown advantage because they have people cheering them on and getting them to participate, and it kind of gets people aroused and into it when everyone else is yelling around you, kind of like when you go to a concert. Can you imagine just sitting, your favorite band's playing, everyone's screaming, everyone's standing, and you're just sitting there in your seat like, yeah, it's good. No, you get up and you yell with them. You don't even want to see me during a Cowboy game. I watch it in private with my family only because I'm ballistic. I'm crazy, So I've been to a game before, face painted and everything, in Florida when they played the Dolphins, and I was insane. And of course, I had everyone around me. We had more Dallas fans, I think, than Dolphin fans there. And I had a bunch of Dallas fans around me, and we were just having a blast. And it does perpetuate and get everybody going. So that's social facilitation. Okay, home team advantage, we talked about that. Social loafing. Okay, here's the opposite effect. I've got people around me, and somebody needs help. Or let's say you're driving down 13 and someone's on the side of the road and they're kind of like standing there like needing help. And you're figuring, there's a lot of people come down the road. I'm late. I've got to get somewhere. I don't want to miss class. Somebody will help them. I'm not going to worry about it. That's what happens with social loafing. When we have a group around, we have other people around, we start to feel like less responsibility, less effort that we have to exert. Somebody's going to stop and pull over and help them. I don't have time to do it. There's plenty of other people that somebody will. The odds are somebody will. So we have that, and that keeps us from doing it. The experiment I think they talk about in your book, or it might be a past edition, is where they did a blinded rope pulling contest. You know how you each get on each side and you try and pull, and you try and pull that little flag across the marker, and whoever team can do. So they blindfolded them and said, okay, there's just you, so do the best you can. Or there's just two of you. And so when the people thought that they were alone and it was based mostly on their effort, they pulled much stronger. They exerted, I don't know how they measured the amount of energy they used, but they used twice as much energy to pull the rope as when they thought they had a whole team helping them pull. So you actually try less hard when you feel like your efforts are with other people. Okay, let's see. De-individuation. Okay, de-individuation is where it's like masking yourself. If I know you can't identify me, I might act differently. So this is when you get the mob mentality, when you have riots in the streets and people start breaking into windows and stealing things. The couple people that get arrested or caught, they say to them, do you normally steal your TV? Do you normally steal things? And they're like, no, I don't know what came over me. I just got caught up. I got caught up. And that's usually what you hear from all of them. I'm not that kind of person. This is not who I am. I've never stolen before in my life. I just got caught up. And a lot of people will say that because when you mask yourself or when you can't be identified, when you make yourself not an individual anymore, when you become part of a group, unidentifiable, humans will do things that they would normally do. And that's what happens in riots. And a lot of times people are not so much that they make their living and provide for themselves by stealing. And it might be the first time they've ever stolen, but it's because they got caught up in the crowd and they really weren't identifiable. It wasn't me as an individual doing this, it was being part of this group, and really the group is doing it. And they get caught up in it and they do it. An example, all right, so here are the three, and this is a good chart for you to use for testing. I'm definitely going to have at least one question from here on the test. This is the example of the riots. This is the thorn again, and this is de-individuation. He can be very shy when he's in front of people, face to face, especially when he first meets you. After he gets to know you, definitely not. But he would play this role for me. I couldn't get him to play any other role when I had the birthday party business, and I would send princesses and princes to little kids' parties. Well, we also had Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and that's the only character he would play. And he would play Mickey, and he would be stupidly crazy. I mean, he'd have the kids, the parents laughing. He would dance. You see how he's laying in the field? He's posing for a picture there. He would never do that in front of any of you, but he'll do it when he has the mask on. Suddenly, you don't know who he is, and he can just be free to be wild and crazy. And the kids loved it. It was great for my business. Okay, group polarization and group think. Group polarization, and here's how you tell the difference. You can think of Facebook for this. When you start seeing post after post after post towards a certain way, we start to think that way. So whenever there's an election, the media jumps on this. If they can make you think that their character, that the wave is going towards their character, you will go that way as well. So what happens is when you get a bunch of people that already have a like-mindedness, and they're around others, that they start to get stronger and stronger and stronger with that. So it polarizes their beliefs. So let's say I have a belief in this candidate. I think they're the best one to be mayor of the town. I start hanging around people who also think it. And you know what? They start coloring everything to look like, yep, the opponent was thinking this when that's why he did that. But our candidate was this. And we just start getting stronger and stronger in our beliefs. We start interpreting everything like good for them, and everything this person does was pure evil. Some way, somehow, I can rationalize it that it was some evil motive. And I get stronger, stronger in my beliefs. We polarize our beliefs when we hang around people who think just like us, or if you have people on your Facebook feed that think just like you, so you're getting all their memes and all their facts and all their things that they're painting this picture, and you get stronger and stronger and stronger in your belief. And that's what happens. And we do that. We hang around people that are like us. We don't like hanging around people that are constantly arguing with us or against what we're saying or doing. Groupthink is where it's almost exactly what I talked about before in conformity. It's part of conformity. So, but groupthink is this. It's not even so much that you're afraid of what people are going to say. It's that you don't want to cause controversy. I want everything to flow. And some of us, we just want to hurry and make a decision so we don't rock the boat. Yeah, it's fine. I'll go along with that. So we do this groupthink thing where once a group has expressed, or a small portion of the group has expressed a desire for a certain way, we just let it go. Even though we might not want that, we want the harmony. So we go along with what the group says to keep the peace, almost, is a way to say it. Like I said, individual power. Once one person expresses a view the other way, it starts like, okay, it kind of stops groupthink, and it causes them to have to really argue for their side if they want it to go through. Just one person opposing it. That's why I've always said, taught my kids, I remember it myself, I'm telling you, when you're out there, if you don't agree with something and you have the time to stand up at least a little bit, stand up. There might be other people that think the way you do, and you're going to be the source. You're going to be the way that they're going to be able to express themselves. Otherwise, they're just going to go with the group think, and so are you. Here's an example of group think. Space Shuttle Challenger was a famous launch because the woman you will see on the top row, and I believe she's the one from the left, one in, she was a school teacher. She was the first civilian to be sent up into space. This was huge. They canceled the launch several times because of the weather, because in Florida it's very hot. Now they're in northern Florida, so they're not down where I lived at the bottom, so where it's hot nonstop. But where they are, sometimes the weather will fluctuate, get a little cooler. It rarely gets cooler, but when it does, it everything constricts. So it's vulnerable to cracking, whereas it was very moist and everything was warm and not dried out. That's the best way to say it. When the weather changes and gets colder, there was a danger of the O-rings cracking, and they weren't in the best condition. So the engineers said, we don't trust those O-rings. We think they might fail. We need to cancel the launch and fix them. Well, the group that was making the decision listened to what the engineers had to say, and the engineers are in this group. But then you had the media people, you had the people marketing that were worried, the people at the top of what NASA looks like. And so they're saying, well, we've already canceled the launch several times. It's cost billions of dollars to cancel it. If we cancel it again, not only is it going to cost us money, we're going to look like failures. And in the past, they've always worked. The last 7 launches, they didn't crack. We're going to go for it. We think it'll be okay. And that one concern, and so what happened was the engineers went along with the group. After they'd voiced their opinion, they went along with the group. And that was the one thing that mattered. The O-rings failed. The thing blew up before it even got out of the atmosphere, and all 7 of those people died, including the school teacher, and the whole world was watching. We don't watch every launch that goes up here because you're close to the base. I guess some people go out and watch it, but it's not a big deal. This was a big deal because of the school teacher. The whole country was, kids were watching it on TV in their classrooms. They were bringing TVs in so that everyone could watch the school teacher, the first civilian going up in space, and we all watched her blow up. That's groupthink, and that's the danger of groupthink. This is just a chart giving you an example from an experiment that was conducted for prejudice, and we saw that when you put people in a group that have the same prejudice, they just get more prejudice. Okay. Prejudice, stereotype, and discrimination are often interchangeable. I want you to see the difference between them. Prejudice and stereotype are opinions. They are beliefs. Both of them are beliefs. Discrimination is behavior. So note the difference between the two. Prejudice and stereotypes are beliefs that we have. Discrimination is a behavior. Okay, so if I give you an example and I say that Jose refused to sell his house or rent an apartment that he owned to a black couple because he only wanted Spanish people in his neighborhood, is that an example of prejudice, stereotype, or discrimination? His behavior was a discrimination because it's a behavior. If I ask you the thought in his head that he didn't want anyone but Spanish people living next to him, and he didn't want black people because they're not Spanish, that is not a discrimination, because the behavior of not letting them in is discrimination, but the thought in his head was a prejudice. Why is it a prejudice? Because it was unjustifiable. I didn't give you anything in the excuse to justify it. I didn't tell you that this particular couple had bad credit, because then it could be um, a justifiable reason. Maybe it's because of their credit report, but I'm telling you that he didn't want them because of the color of their skin. That's prejudice. That's an unjustifiable wrong attitude towards somebody. Okay? So a stereotype is a bigger umbrella. So prejudice causes stereotypes. Stereotypes sometimes are based on truth or they're based on some part of truth. But a prejudice is unjustifiable even if the stereotype is there. Let's put it that way. There are stereotypes. There's stereotypes about Trinidadians being late everywhere. It's freaking true. I don't have a prejudice towards my best friend, but I know darn well she's going to be late based on the stereotype. I always lie to her. If I want her to pick me up at 3:30, I always tell her we have to leave by 3. Inevitably, she arrives at 3:30. I can count it like clockwork. She is never, never less than 20 minutes late, usually 30 or 40. So I always give myself a half an hour window with her and just straight out lie. That's how I get along with her. Am I prejudiced against her? No, I love her. I love her family. I love all Trinidadians. I love her like my sister. But I know the stereotype, and she holds it true every time. The islanders are late. Implicit prejudice exists. You don't think it exists. That's why it's implicit, but it exists. Research supports it. So I don't care what your intuition is or what your belief is. I'm telling you that we still have implicit biases inside of us, prejudice. It goes two ways. It goes both ways, and I don't care if you talk about Germans and Jews, if you're talking about Arabs and Israelites, if you're talking about blacks and whites, if you're talking about rich and poor, whatever you can say in us and them, we have implicit prejudice against the other group. It's inbred in us, and it was uncovered in this experiment where um, they showed people video games, and in the video games, they had to quickly shoot at anyone who had a weapon. So they would have someone appear, and they would either have a weapon or they would have something that was harmless, and you had to shoot at only the ones who had weapons. Well, it turned out that when there was a black person that came out with the weapon, and this was a white-black study, the white people would shoot more often wrong. They would make the mistake to shoot a black person when they did not have a weapon. Interesting. Now listen to this. When black people did it, they also made the mistake of shooting black unarmed people more often, equally as much as whites. Here's a great example of our problem with stereotyping or stereotypical errors that we can make. If that oval represents the whole group of Muslims and terrorist is that other oval, you can see how a lot of terrorists are Muslims, and you could probably move that oval over a little more, but the majority of Muslims are not terrorists. Do you see? That's something I learned by living over there, surrounded by Muslims in a Muslim country where it was dictated you had to be Muslim, except for visitors like me. And terrorism, the majority of the people were just family people that loved each other, and the husbands treated their wives really well, like queens, and their kids like little princes and princesses. They loved each other. They were happy together, and I witnessed it for years. I lived over there for years, so it wasn't just a vacation. Okay, going through aggression. So there may be some genetic markers, and what I want you to know for the test is that there is genetic influence to aggression. So people who tend to react aggressively can be influenced by a genetic factor. It may be that you have a tendency. I'm not saying you have to be or it's written in stone. Remember, genetics is a predisposition, and depending on your environment, you could lean either way. So there may be a predisposition to be aggressive. Alcohol also increases it. Frustration increases it. The frustration aggression hypothesis is that when someone's frustrated, they may react with aggression. You may act the opposite way too. Some people cry when they're frustrated. They just get so frustrated they just start crying. Some people are the opposite. They start breaking things. Okay, so aggression can be motivated by frustration. The neural influences, and this goes again, this is all falling under biology, whether it's genetic marker, whether it is a neural system that facilitates aggression. And we see that in the amygdala, in that area where we have emotions, there's also an area where there's rage. And we know it because we've stimulated rats, and you can stimulate them and they will vicious, they will attack their own children. They become so vicious for their own pups, let's say pups, rat pups. So if you stimulate it, if you kill it, if you spike it to where you knock out that part of the brain, they won't even defend themselves. So we know there's a rage, there's an anger area, there's a neural substrate in our head that may be responsible for it. And for us, it's more likely in the frontal lobe. So what I want you to know is that aggression might be biologically supported by a gene. We know that alcohol can um, exasperate that genetic response. We know that frustration can light it up. We know that there's a neural system or substrate, and it's probably for us located in the frontal lobe. I want you to just remember the frontal lobe, okay? And then our biochemical influence. We know that people that are high in testosterone, this is why men are more aggressive, more physical than women, because they have more testosterone. And we know that that increases it. And when you add it to alcohol, it gets even worse. Okay, so what I was saying before, I jumped ahead of myself. The frustration aggression principle or hypothesis or theory is that frustration causes anger, which in some people can cause aggressive behavior. So this is chapter 13. Go home and go back over these and use my slide, especially for this one on this list of social influence, because you can see these things are here. For consistency, remember, I'm just going to go with the foot in the door title for that. Maybe I'll put both on it when I use it, just so you're not confused. Or if you remember one more than the other, I don't want you to lose out. Okay, so that's it. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there today, but I've got to stay with my son and take care of him and not make him lay here on the floor in my office. It's too miserable. He's laying in the car right now waiting for me to finish this. So I'm thankful for all of you who came. Please write your name down on a piece of paper so I know who stayed and was loyal and tried. I can see that you're working hard to pass this class, and I want to know who you are. I want to know who left. Okay, thank you.